Niels, you're strategically lost here as white. You see, you have the bad bishop and black has the good bishop. And not only that, but you have the famous space disadvantage where your pawns are overextended. They're going to get ganged up on by black. And just look at this, and you've got nothing. Your lean development is absolutely meaningless in this closed position. That is why black has strategically won, and this is why you lost the game. And don't bother switching on a computer and saying, oh, computer says 000 at depth 64. Oh, computer knows nothing. Like, this is really deep. This is far beyond understanding of any engine, except maybe Alpha Zero, but it got completely destroyed because we couldn't have it taking over the world and working out the neural network for taking over all of humanity and making us all our slaves that feeds off in Matrix style. Illingworth chess, GM chess lessons to improve your chess. What's up guys, it's GM Max here, and this video is all about play e4, e6. You heard me, just play it. You know, they play e4, you play the French defense, and this video is going to be a little bit shorter than the previous one I did on the French. I'm going to put that up in, up here or down there in the description. You're going to see it somewhere, guys. In any case, after e4, e6, so Israel don't have to play the move d4, but if they play something like King's Indian attack, d5, and there are a lot of good setups, but I think that the setup where you go for like c5, the thing is that if you play like your usual knight f6, bishop e7 castles, well, most King's Indian attack players are pretty well prepared for that. Of course, it's still a very good system for black, it is the main line. But if you wanted to take the opponent out of their usual setups, I think the bishop d6 setup is one of the better ways to do so. We put the knight on e7, and one thing that you're immediately going to notice here is that white is not really able to get his e5 push to hit the center. And if he does try to prepare rook e1, then we can even play moves like f6 if we want to, just not allowing e5, and that's certainly one way to play it. Or you can also play prophylactic moves like bishop to c7 here. And so if they do play e5, it doesn't really come with a tempo. And the computer wants to play a move like h6 or a5, which is way too deep for me, so I guess there's that. So yeah, King's Indian attack in general, not too scary. That the bishop d6, knight 7 setup does kind of neutralize it. If they play something like knight f3 instead, then yeah, I mean, knight c3, there are a lot of good replies here. Probably the simplest one, for those of you who've seen my previous video, is just to go knight to f6, and then go for e5, knight d7, and just transpose back into the kind of Steinitz lines from before. But if you want to play it in a little bit more independent fashion, you can just go d4, and just take the center, and like once you put the knights on c6 and f6 directly, even as a potential temporary pawn sack, like knight f6 and this kind of thing, then yeah, I mean, black is just doing fine here. Yeah, probably cd4 makes more sense. You kind of say, yeah, you can try to grab a pawn, but it actually doesn't work that well. Knight ed4, we go knight takes e4, and if e5, we got a little few tactics up our sleeve, guys, where we can meet knight e takes d4, with knight e takes e5, and look at that, the chained knights stuck defending each other on babysitting duty. Now, if you want to be able to play awesome tactical tricks like this, make sure to smash that like button, and also comment below with what your favorite chess trick is in the French defense. If you don't know it yet, you'll certainly know a lot after this video. But okay, enough about these random sidelines. Well, one more I'll point out, if e5, if they do play a wing gambit. I think wing gambit's a pretty rubbish system. I think you should just take and just take all the pawns, play like knight c6, bishop d7, and I think if you develop your queenside early, it sort of really takes all the sting out of their queenside play. I think the best what I can really hope for is equality at this point. So yeah, I mean, there are other random moves I can play, but I don't want to waste my time like covering, the Bomb Cloud King e2 and this kind of thing. So instead, let's go to the game. Grandelius Harikrishna, Tata Steel 2021. This is the famous Vikings tournament in the Netherlands, where you have the delicious ham and pea soup, nice and hot, to keep you warm on those negative 20 degrees Celsius days. In any case, after d5, the game saw e5. But what about other moves? Yeah, I could be lazy and say I covered in the previous French defense video. It is true, but I want to show you the lazy way to play e4, e6. Those of you who don't have to spend the midnight oil learning all your theory, you just want to play chess and have lots of time, to go out partying, drinking, whatever it is that you like to do when you're not watching YouTube videos. Or maybe you go partying and drinking so you can watch YouTube videos together. Now that's what the cool kids do. But okay, if they play the move like knight to c3, a simple system, and this one you can also play against knight d2, by the way. We're going to play the same move. Is the Rubinstein variation with d takes c4. And you might notice a certain similarity with this compared to the Bern variation that I showed you in the previous French defense video. But here I'm going to suggest the move of playing bishop d7 as a very lazy kind of shortcut. Again, objectively the best move is to go knight d7 and go for knight f6 and c5. It's actually a little bit more work to learn, but it is a better system. But if you want to just completely avoid fury, there is this line known as the Fort Knox with bishop d7. And the idea is that often the French bishop is quite bad on c8, so you kind of go bishop c6 and just activate the bishop on the long diagonal. And after bishop d3, you go knight d7. Because I remember when I was like playing this in some random games a few weeks ago on League Chess, what I kind of found is that very few players were really well prepared for this particular position. And a lot of players, for example, would play like bishop g5 against me and just make it very easy for me to swap off the pieces. And in doing so, what you're going to notice is because white does have a space advantage, that pretty much every exchange is going to favor black in this sort of position. Of course, every equal exchange. So what would you think would be the way, therefore, for black to take back on f6 in this position? What would be your decision here? Again, we might have a split decision, but actually the move is bishop takes f6. Yeah, knight f6 is not terrible either, but I like the idea of trading off the bishop, and you also get some pressure against the center if they don't take. So I think that black should be doing quite fine in this case. The one disadvantage of playing the bishop c6 is it does make it very hard for you to challenge the center with c5. And white can exploit that with the move knight g3. And in this case, I mean, the normal way to play the position is rook to is bishop e7. And say they play queen e2 or rook e1. Then yeah, typically you're just going to take on f3 and give up the bishop pair. But have this very solid position with the pawns on the light squares where your bishop kind of complements the remaining pawns, as it were. In some ways, this kind of reminds a bit of a Scandinavian. White does have the bishop pair. He does have the extra space, so he is slightly better. But black's very solid, and often you can sort of play in the middle game moves like pushing the A pawn or even the B pawn, and try to create a few little subtle weaknesses in the white queenside structure. So it's not like you're just playing for a draw. There is scope to play for a win as black, especially in faster time controls against opponents who are maybe not so comfortable in these sort of very, let's say, slower paced strategic type of positions. So anyway, that's the Fort Knox as kind of my shortcut so that we have time to cover the other moves as well. If they do go ed5, ed5, I already talked about knight to f3 in the earlier, play the French defense video, or win with the French defense video rather. If they do play something more direct like c4, I find that just knight f3, knight f6, knight c3, bishop b4, it's working pretty well. The idea is if cd5 you take back with a knight, you get a bit of pressure with the pin. Or if they go bishop d3, you can just sort of take and castle, and you're going to put the knight on c6, or you can put the knight on d7 and go to b6 to hit this bishop. Because one thing to keep in mind in these sort of positions, guys, is that after bishop b3, that because white has isolated queen's pawn, it means that d5 point is a very juicy square for a knight. And so we can eventually play like c6, put a knight on d5, and black's just going to be very comfortable in that case, because white's knight is also not the most active on e2 in this particular position. So exchange, yeah, not too scary in general. If you don't want to play more for equality than unbalancing the play, there is knight f6, bishop d6 castles, which, just playing normal moves, you're not really going to run into too much danger as black in general. Though you may find it a little bit hard to play for a win if you just copy white every single move of the game, which is why I recommended bishop d6 and knight e7 in the earlier video as a more dynamic way to play as black. You can check that video in the description for more deets. So let's see how the game played. White played the move e5. I think that e5 is a move that, well, it's sort of an interesting question, like what are you actually going to face most often in your games? I'd say you're probably going to face knight c3 the most often, but 2000 level and below. Probably ed5 is what you'll face next most often, maybe at 1600 level and below. And I'd probably put e5 in kind of a sort of third place, or maybe even second place. We're talking like 2000 level players. Once you get to 2200 plus, you will face knight d2 more often. But like I said, we've got a 2-in-1 system against both the knight moves, so that's always sweet for us. So after e5, we go c5, and now we get into the game Grandelius Harikrishna. Because you might recall that in the earlier video, I was recommending knight c6 and the plan of pressuring the pawn on d4. But Harikrishna showed a different plan with bishop to d7 at this point. And the idea of bishop d7 in not playing knight c6 immediately is that we keep the option of playing bishop to b5 and trading off that good bishop for our bad bishop. And it does take quite a bit of time. We are moving the same piece more than once. The black's argument is in such a close position is not going to be such a big deal. Now, if white tries to play a3 and get a move like b4, well, we can even play moves like a5 and just make it very hard for white to get in this pawn move. And if they do play a4 and try to stop bishop b5, well, yeah, you can take, and you sort of see that now black gets a very nice square on b4 for the knight. That pretty much ensures his position is very, very comfortable. Well, white played bishop e2, a very healthy move in this position. And now I would probably go bishop b5 immediately, but Instead, Harikrishna played the move c takes d4 first, and then played bishop b5. Now, the advantage of this move order is that you're not worrying about moves like c4 trying to open up the center to exploit lean development. The trade-off, or the caveat, is that you are giving white a c3 square for the knight, but that might not be that big of a deal as it seems. You know, for example, if white goes, let's say, bishop takes b5, and then plays knight c3, well, black's got to move bishop b4 to kind of pin the knight, and we also see white's not really able to castle his king at the moment because of the, you know, the pin from the queen. But on the other hand, you know, if the queens do come off, well, again, because black has less space, and because this d4 pawn is a long-term target, the endgame's just generally very, very pleasant for black in the French. You know, something like queen e2 we would be incredibly happy to see. You know, you can just put the knight on f5, we can hit the pawn of f6, and it's just very hard for white to use the space advantage in any kind of meaningful way as more and more pieces get traded. That's also another point I would kind of see as well with black's played it. You know, trading off the minor pieces does help him relieve his cramp. So the game went castles. You know, maybe white should go a3. You know, maybe this idea of going knight c3 without allowing bishop b4 is probably the way that white should play to get some sort of opening advantage. Though, of course, black's position is still relatively solid. But in any case, the move castles was played, and now I feel like black is doing fine. You know, I kind of joked at the start of the video that this is a forced win for black. Obviously, I was exaggerating. Like, I try to, you know, do like these funny tones so you can tell like when I'm not being serious. But anyway, the game saw knight to c6. You know, it makes sense to pressure the pawn, but it's not technically a threat to take the pawn, because after knight c3, which was played by Grandelius here, if Harikrishna were to play knight d4, the problem is that after knight takes and queen takes, that you have left your king very exposed. You know, black still has completely left his king side undeveloped, and, you know, after move queen b5, you know, well done if you spot that idea. Well, white's going to take b7 and have a decisive attack. So instead, it's better to play knight g7, as Harikrishna did. We had queen d3 keeping that pawn defended, and now to move rook c8. Yeah, in this position, you could also consider a move like knight b4, just trying to be a bit annoying and harass the queen. Because if white does play a move like queen d1, for example, well, you can sort of bring the knight back and kind of make the argument that a3, knight c6, that, you know, a3 is not really that useful for white anyway. And otherwise, the knight's just sort of a bit of a pain on this square. So that was definitely an alternative. But okay, rook c8, not the worst move either. And, well, white played a move rook d1 here. You know, definitely wanting to make sure that pawn's overprotected, just anticipating knight f5. Harikrishna played the move h6. Yeah, it wouldn't be my first choice. I feel like that this area of trying to avoid knight g5 is a little bit too prophylactic for my taste. I think that there's nothing really wrong with playing... well, it's an interesting question what black should do instead. Like, I still kind of like the knight b4, just kind of force the queen to a sort of silly square. I mean, you never know when you might be able to play like some queen a6 or some knight f5 and get the piece more active that way. But the game saw h6, and after bishop d2, knight g6. So I guess it was Harikrishna's idea. He kind of wanted to have this g6 square for the knight, and without kind of worrying about some h4, h5, h6. But to be fair, maybe this is the way that Grandelius should have played it. You know, I think that by charging Harry the h-pawn alpha 0 style, I think that, well, the point is that, you know, after bishop e7, for example, white can go h5, and that knight doesn't really have a great square. Because if you put on h4, you're kind of misplacing your bishop after the exchange, which is not really ideal. But if you go knight f8 instead of sidelining the knight, well, you see that the knight's sort of stopping black castling and really gets in the way of his position. And white could try to use that time to play knight a4, and you know, knight 4 is a very standard idea for white in the advanced French, that he wants to get that knight to c5 in order to, well, clog up the c file and also pressure b7, which can be a bit weak if white were to take the initiative. I mean, to be fair, the ending after queen a6 is probably still not so bad for black, because even though you have the doubled pawns, it also does give you potential counterplay down the b file. It's not like white's really in a position to attack those doubled pawns, so not that much of a weakness, to be fair. But I do think you could still say white's a little bit better in this sort of ending, and therefore this probably was still maybe the way to play it. Actually, Grandelius did play the move h4, so yeah, well, good on you, Nils, and good on you, everyone who found the move. Well, the game went bishop b4, and again, I like knight to a4, and that is indeed the move that was played. But it was sort of around this point that I remember that after really playing this opening very well and kind of outplaying Harikrishna, getting a nice advantage, this is when Nils started to go astray and sort of allowed himself to be outplayed by his opponent. Well, to be fair, to move h5 I think is still perfectly fine. It does make sense to kick that knight around, even if I maybe would have gone bishop b4 first. But after knight g7, yeah, I think that here white's move was probably not strategically the right decision. Well, what would be your choice? Like, how would you deal with the tension between the bishops here as white? So as always, guys, do make sure to comment below with the move that you would play. I find it really interesting to see the different ideas that people come up with, and also gets a chance you guys get some free coaching, right? Because I do try to respond to the comments where I can. And you also make sure to hit that subscribe button for more of my Grandmaster Chess video lessons. Or if you're just here for the entertainment, well, you're just as welcome to. So white played a move bishop f4, and I think the idea is that you want to try and trap in this bishop, but the problem is that when you play bishop f4, you're also losing a whole tempo, and black can use that tempo very nicely, as we'll see in the game. I think a much better approach is to keep in mind that the d2 bishop is white's bad bishop, and it's sort of trading it for black's good bishop. I think makes a lot of sense. In it, well, okay, black gets knight to b4, but after queen e2, the knight is forced to go back again. And after knight b6, and let's say rook to c1, you can put the knight on c5, potentially you can go b4. I do feel like white gets a pretty nice initiative in that case. I mean, to be fair, I think if you want to play rook ac1, that's also a very good move, just letting them take you. And then going rook takes so that you can kind of swing the rook over. They probably, black has to try some move like b6 to stop knight c5 later. But that also does create some weaknesses, and I think that white's in a very good position to take some of those squares and just nurse this very nice initiative on the queen side that white's developed. But instead he played bishop f4, and now from this point it's all Harikrishna, showing why he's one of the greatest Indian chess players of all time. He played a move queen a5, hitting that knight. And white should probably play the move queen to b3 and just sort of accept the coming b5. I think still that position is not so bad for white. But b3 I think is, a little bit imprecise. I can remember being a bit too harsh. It's probably not so bad either, but admittedly I do think that the knight being on b2, it does look a little bit ugly. It kind of looks worse for white than it is to a certain extent. Well, black played bishop a3. If you want to go bishop c3 and pin the knight that way, that was also perfectly fine. But after queen 2 castle, we can kind of see that the game has sort of shifted a little bit in black's favour, at least on the sort of psychological or practical level. Because if white doesn't find something really good, black's just going to play moves like knight b4, knight f5, and just sort of be able to hit those weaknesses like that fixed pawn a2, which is fixed as a target. And also this c2 square even can be an invasion point for the rook potentially, because b3 has weakened a lot of those squares on the queen side, as you can see. I think if I was white in this position, I think I would probably go for a move like g4, and just try to get some counterplay somewhere. I mean, if white can get a move like g5 and get the rook to g-file, I mean, that can be a quite serious attack. And it definitely would fit in with Nils' very attacking spirit. So I think that was the right way to play it. I mean, rook b1, to be fair, probably is also perfectly fine. But after rook c7, I think that around this point after knight d3 and queen to b6, this was sort of a somewhat critical moment of the game where I think that at this point you just have to accept that you're not really better as white and just go into defensive mode. Because if black isn't able to sort of win the pawn on d4, it's not that easy for him to find another easy target at the moment. So I think that knight d1, even though it looks funny, I think that the point of bringing the knight to c2 and just covering this pawn is a very good one. Because you're also preparing moves like g4 as well as hitting the bishop. After bishop e7, g4. The knight's forced this very ugly h4 square, and we kind of see that even after a move like knight fe1, for example, that knight's kind of out of play, and even though white is not exactly in a position to win the knight by force, because there's a bit too much going on the other sides of the board. So, I mean, that knight is basically not really doing anything. I think that gives white some real scope to, well, try outplay his opponent from here at the very least. Black would probably go like b4 and g5, and, then it's anyone's game. But instead after b4, like, he's trying to trap in the bishop, but after a5, that bishop is getting free. And again, at a point that we see quite a lot in the French, is that, in principle, the opening of the queenside is going to favour black in the sense that, well, he just can attack the pawns a lot more easily, and he just decide where his pawns are kind of pointing to some extent. Now, to be fair, this might be a possible exception in it if white did go g4 and just commit everything to the kingside attack. He'd actually still probably have pretty decent chances. So it's not as though b4ing is necessarily a big mistake objectively, but it's kind of important for white to follow it up correctly and just go all out for the kingside attack. In the game, white never really played this move at g4, and basically that's the reason that he lost. He didn't show the necessary courage and bravado. It's funny, I said coverage, but I meant to say courage, but I guess coverage also works. In any case, bishop c1 was played, and yeah, that was sort of a big mistake. I mean, it's in principle, it might make some sense in theory to trade off black's good bishop, but like I've said in some previous videos, what matters is not the pieces that are traded, but the pieces that are left on the board. And what we see is after rook c1, knight c1, knight c4, that all of black's remaining pieces are basically better. This knight has a beautiful outpost, which is a lot better even than a knight on c5, if white was able to get there. Also, black's in a great position to attack d4. You know, it's easier to attack white's weaknesses than it is for white to attack black's weaknesses. You know, black king is now perfectly safe, like g4, g5 does not have the same bite to it that it did with the bishop, sort of backing the, you know, the attack on h6 later. So all that kind of adds up basically to black just being much better. And actually, Harikrishna went on to win pretty fast from here. So let's see the final moves. Knight b3 was played. Black played rook to a8. I probably would have gone knight c6 first, but there's nothing really wrong with Harikrishna's move order. He's still putting all the pieces on the right squares. I mean, I think probably this was sort of the last chance for white to try to go into swindle mode with g4. Because at this point, we kind of see the way that black often typically wins in the French. Simply just by kind of outplaying the opponent strategically, just trading off the right pieces, creating some weaknesses in the opponent's pawns, and then just eventually destroying those weaknesses by leaving white kind of overextended. So white went g3, black played rook a3, you know, very Soviet style, fix the opponent's weakness in place. And then after king g2 and queen a7, yeah, there's just no really good way to defend the pawn, because in the game after rook c2, black played the move knight to b4, which is, yeah, just very nasty fork. And, well, we see after rook c3, knight a2 that black has got the passed pawn. Let's push him, baby. After rook to d3, black just liquidated off white's few good pieces left with rook b3, knight c1. And after queen c2, takes, and queen a4, we can see that the white king is cut off here. And, well, a move like queen takes a4 would be a clearly lost endgame. Because, I mean, the knight endings are kind of like pawn endgames according to Mikhail Botvinnik. And certainly, if it was a pawn ending, this would be an easy win. And since it's a knight ending, it's also an easy win for that reason. Well, after queen b1, black played b4. And Grandelius knew he was dead. The pawn is coming to b2. And, well, we're going to make a new queen. And there's not really anything great white can do about that. So white resigned. So there you are. That's why you should play the French defense. You should play the French defense, not just because I'm a grandmaster and I said so, but because we can see that with the French defense that it's very easy to play. You can play it basically just to activate your bad French bishop, so that those people who do those memes saying, oh, your bishop's stuck on c8, you're going to lose the game at disadvantage. Well, you just trade that bishop off, whether it's bishop d7, bishop c6, or bishop d7, bishop b5 like in the game. Swap off the bishops, and then you know then that once you manage to complete your development, you've got that strategic advantage of having the better bishop than the opponent. In fact, I know of one student actually who was absolutely obsessed about the bishops, where he said, all I care about when playing chess is I have the better bishop, because I know that strategic advantage will win me the game. Well, Botvinnik did say that you can evaluate the position by comparing the bishops, and certainly that was a big part of what led to black's success here. So guys, do make sure to comment below, what did you love about this video, and are you ready to start playing the French defense in your own games? Make sure to smash that like button, hit subscribe, hit the notification bell to get more of my Grandmaster Chess videos, and I will see you in the next one. Illingworth Chess, the best to improve your chess.